All right, there we are. So it is May the 4th, and today's start of May call is probably one of our last 11 a.m. calls. I'm going to be moving these half an hour earlier in the next couple of weeks to 10:30 Eastern. And so just to note that these have been at 11, but they're going a bit earlier, 10:30. There's only 2 calls for the month of May. There's this call, and then next week's call on the 11th is going to be a design sprint. So if you want 30 minutes to take some action on one of your program designs, hope you'll find your way back here into my Zoom room for our next topic, which is all about design sprint. But today is mantras about virtual work, programming, and learning, a big key issue. I know, Kathy, you shared with me you've got a virtual program next week. So what's your biggest question mark, or what's your biggest question around virtual today?
So my biggest question is how to keep that red line. Like I'm taking a 1-day program, well, 1.5-day program, shortening it, having them do more pre-work in advance, but what's the red thread that I can keep in? And the second would be looking future, looking at doing something more regular. And I think some sort of mantra, call to action, something would be nice for people who might be taking something every week or every other week. Yeah.
Well, I think, consistency is so key at any day, but especially in the remote space. Last month, I think you were with us for some of those community calls, right? And I was sharing the remote enablers. Consistency, and showing up on a consistent basis. Most people know it's Monday morning, you can find me here. And if they can't find me here, they'll check out the recording. So think about how you're doing that in all our work, whether we're designing learning programs, whether we're leading a team, whether we're having team meetings, it's all the same stuff, whether we're an entrepreneur or a learning designer. So I had fun doing this one, right? Like so much of my work has been remote in the last 30 years, starting with long range radio and now in recent months of like being able to like continue to run, if not excel the business with all on the go. And there is a lot of need out there. I would just earmark, there is so much need right now for support of people transitioning skills, transitioning conversations. Every country is sort of going down its own pathway in terms of like reintegration. But I know for us here in Canada, like those in an office, it's not going to look the same. It's still going to have a strong component of working from home, even as lighten up. So think about that. And here's where we're going to go. Like a mantra is really a statement or a slogan repeated frequently. So what I wanted to zoom into today, just to keep it simple, which is one of our mantras, is like boil it down to 5. Now, these are not the only 5, but I really stopped this weekend to think, what are the things I do consistently to create great programming, right? It's really about thinking, what are the things people like? What are the things people get value around, etc. So I hope you'll take some notes, whether you're here with us live or other. Just a reminder of where we've been, because this really builds on to some past calls. So today's about mantras, but 2 weeks ago I was talking about myths. And so in fact, you might want to go back to the myths, because there are some things that we hold as an assumption or a myth that probably really aren't valid. And that's a good call. Again, 25 minutes. Last month we did strengths. I don't know, were you with us for the strengths call? Maybe not. I don't know.
Honestly, it's like you, it's been a blur for other reasons.
It is a blur, but before all this blur started, it was no person is an island. That was the call back in February about collaboration. And one thing I'll report back on, like a few weeks ago, maybe last week, weeks are taking new meaning here, right? I think it was last week actually, and I was speaking to a group of HR professionals. The group size doubled in volume as they increased their Zoom room, and they actually had to like cap it at a certain number because they just didn't have enough space. But what it was all about was remote collaboration. And I think that right now for teams is really the sticking point, right? Teams have probably found their way into working from home. Routines might not be the best, but like the conversations are continuing. Collaborating now. How do we keep things running in a way that's going to keep this business thriving? Big challenge, as is needed. needs. Those are really the two issues that I've been hearing a lot from my clients. And then if we look out across the tech sector as a whole, there's been some really interesting research happening in the last few weeks around what are the major pain points. So I'm just going to drop that in, because if you're meeting with any teams, groups, organizations, like these are going to be some of the questions. So some of these mantras will really help you with where you go. And for years, I think starting 10 years ago in my first book, Effective Group Coaching, I talked about the less is more principle. It's essential for any great design, especially when we want good conversation. We can't have a lot. That's why I'm not bringing 15 mantras today. 5 mantras, let's talk about them. And as I wrote back in Effective Virtual Conversations a few years ago, less is more in virtual facilitation. First, everything you do, especially the first time, will take more time than you expect. So people like Kathy, who are doing their own first programs in that transition phase, even for seasoned people like me, I always know it's gonna take more time. There may be a couple of minutes before we really get going. There may be some tech challenges. So really think about how you can whittle down your design. And just like I shared back in Effective Group Coaching, think about the accordion. What gets compressed if people are loving the conversation and that's where you want to keep them? And what gets expanded if there's silence? So you really want to have that, you know, to the red line principle, right? There's also like a red line, but there might be a blue line where you're constantly looking at those compression points. And that will be designed with your clients. It will be designed by you with a sponsor, depending on what hat you're wearing, if it's training, coaching, consulting. But we have this, yeah, go ahead.
It reminds me of adaptive leadership, where you have the 2 axes and you're going like this sometimes, and just kind of keep, you know, where's that middle range where you're not going too much or too little.
Yeah, and that's it. So like, how do you find that accordion point? You might ask questions like, what's the nice to have versus the need to have? I keep going back to that framework that I first picked up from Bob Pike, whose company is Creative Training Techniques. I did a session, a 3-day train-a-trainer with him probably in maybe 1999, long time ago, but best 3 days of my investment. And he talks about what's a nice to know versus a need to know. And then anything else that can't fit in, put it in a where to go. Make it a 1-page tip sheet. Make it a, you know, like find the recording online. And so that'll be big, you know, as you look at your design every day or regularly before you kick off. And that feeds into the second one. Keep it simple, not simplistic. Something I've been saying a lot more of. I think it first showed up in EVC, but like simplicity is key. It doesn't mean that it's basic. It just means that we've distilled it down to its core unit. And again, in times of disruption, in times of rapid change, that's what we want to do. It's about the guts, the nuggets, and not so much about all these like fancy dancy things, because we need to know what to focus on against a very swirling context. So think about what you're pulling together next week, Kathy. Like, what would keeping it simplistic look like from a design standpoint?
Well, I already identified that over 2 hours, right, each day, that each will have a theme, and the themes are very clear. So, and by doing that, actually, it already begins to whittle away what you'll do during the time and what you'll ask people to do before and after. We already set out the pre-work, but what they'll do like overnight. That was one way of just having themes so people know on this day we're focusing on X. And this is the link to that exercise that I'm doing beforehand. This is what I'm gonna be asked to do between, you know, this day and this day.
That's great.
And then I'll keep like an office hour afterwards in case someone needs to talk it through. But just mindful that 2 hours is probably as much as people can do. And having a theme for each day, not a topics, theme, kind of paints the picture of where we're trying to go.
Yeah, love it. And again, I'm imagining your groups had the chance to paint out those themes with you, right? Did they co-design it, or was it
a sponsor did? We had a very long conversation, because it was literally like a 10-hour course that you're trying to make doable. And so we made it 6 plus pre-work, more pre-work, because that's what was taking so much time, the things in the room.
In the room.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yep.
you know, that's what the research has shown. You've got to really bulk up the pre-work and post-work, have people make sure they're building in time in their schedule. And like you've mentioned, have a drop in office hours if people need you for like half an hour, right? It's
Yep.
added time if no one shows up, but if people do need you, you're there, and it's a
Yep.
benefit. So the third one takes us really into the whole neuroscience. And actually this shows up, this is Joe, who is our virtual facilitator from Effective Virtual Conversations. I don't know if you've been on one of the calls that I've done on some of the neuroscience of virtual, but it's really quite fascinating. This comes from the design chapter. So that is chapter number, it's actually page 162, 163 of chapter 5. And I'm going to just maybe go through, I won't go through all of them. I'll do a separate call on all of these, but these are really things that you're going to want to keep in mind as you go. Social brain, right? As soon as we're in a remote space, we learn by creating mental models, right? That's been a well-known fact in learning for decades now. But how are we hanging our knowledge on with like those we connect with? And given that there's no context in remote, that's where social connection becomes a really important enabler to creating mental models. So really be thinking about how you can activate the social brain. It may be through the breakouts, it may be through co-creating something on a whiteboard, you know, as a shared screen and annotation. It could look like many different things, but we learn through others. We learn through hearing from others. So making sure you're building that time in. And do you have any, are you doing Zoom for your platform, or what platform?
We're going to use Zoom. And I'm only having, 15 registered, probably 12 will show up. So it's actually a perfect size.
Nice. Yeah.
But I'm thinking of something that I was on a different call where someone was talking about, we are on calls with people in teams, but then we walk away and in the remote space, we're having conversations with other people who have no idea about the team or what they're doing. And we're unconsciously making sense of what we heard through these other conversations. So it's the external to the team, external to the learning.
Yeah.
Just wondering what would one do? Like, could you direct people to go have a conversation with someone rather than having it just happen? I'm just trying to think, because it's obviously in the remote space, it's going to happen that people walk away and talk about something that they learn. But how do you direct it so that it's more intentional as opposed to, oh, by the way?
Yeah, I'll always build it in the last 3 to 5 minutes. What, like initial individual reflection. And then if you want to frame a culture, like I think this is a really great point, because if you want to frame ongoing sharing, because we forget what conversations we've had and who we've had with, who we've had it with. So you might even have like a daily huddle or a 3 times a week huddle, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And as part of that, you might get people into the practice of noting down some of the bullet points that they've learned throughout the week. Like, while that can take time, if you write it, people probably won't look at it. But if they hear it and we go around our room just quickly, like, here's some of the big ahas I've had this week that I think we need to look at as a team, blank. And then you just keep circulating. Because otherwise, there's like lots of learning that's happening, but it's not going back to the team if you're a team that needs to operate together. So and that links in really nicely, right? Like micro moments comes from Barbara Fredrickson and her work, and she really talks about how it's just these very small moments and these very small changes that really have the ripple effect. And that's where it doesn't have to take half an hour, right? I think a lot of people are thinking, oh, if I'm going to do a meeting, it has to be long. No, set a timer, make it 15 minutes, be intentional, like crisp. You have 2 sentences, and that requires training on the part of the team members to keep it concise and like there. But we need to hear it. We need to hear it verbally, not just textually, which has been the default, right? That's been the default for remote for many years. And people are realizing, I got to pick up the phone again. I got to have a conversation. I can't just do it flat on text. So that might also feed into the positive interaction, right? That talks to really again, some of the work that John Gottman has done, some of the positivity ratio that Fredrickson has done. And while it has been quote unquote statistically like looked at as maybe not being accurate, anecdotally, right? Teams that are able to provide more frequent feedback, positive and constructive, excel. We have to have that regular feedback loop. So really right now, it's key to bring people together. I think people have moved through weeks of like, oh, meetings that haven't been great, but you got to get into these 15-minute crisp meetings and just people talking and sharing.
Yeah.
So out of the remainder, I won't go into all of them. I'll save them for another call. Which one are you intrigued by, Kathy, out of like the PEA, NEA through to oxytocin?
So I think it's the latency and the recency. So the others I think I'm familiar with. So recency would be what happened just before, or the last thing that was said, and latency.
What was first said. So latency and recency. You remember the start and end of things. That's what it's all about. And like that loop in the middle, it's messy, right? There's a book called The Messy Middle, and very much we forget what is discussed in the midpoint of a conversation. So that can be a really good spot to actually do an intentional pause, 30 to 45 seconds. We're midway through our call right now. I want to give you 30 minutes of silence. Pull out your calendar, pull out your journal, wherever you're taking notes. I want you to jot down the top 3 bullets, and I want you to schedule in that conversation you're going to have to share this with someone else. Like, be intentional, because if we just keep talking, no one's going to do it. Right? And then they're running to another meeting and they're late because the meeting has run over. One of my clients has instituted a 10-minute rule so that their meetings have to end 10 minutes before the hour so that people can actually get into the next meeting and have a chance to have a bio break before they go there. Because it's not healthy, right? It's not healthy what we're doing to our bodies either. So
it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. It doesn't. So latency and recency, we remember the start and end. How do you anchor what you want people to remember start and end, but be paying attention to the middle, which is not going to get lost. And so how do you anchor that? So I'll come back to that. Here's some really fun, like this is the 4th one. How are adults learning? How do adults learn? Twice. Experiential. So what can we do to make experiential processes work virtually? And that's not like something we're going to touch on in this call, but a few months ago I did more a call focusing on the what, so what, now what. Here people can view that one, which taps more into that experiential cycle of learning, right? We want to really be thinking about the whole cycle, not just being talked at. And that may mean that we're multisensory. So I was part of an amazing online conference Thursday through Saturday as an attendee. I was actually supposed to be in Florida last week, and I'd been looking forward to getting somewhere warm and sunny and smelling so good until, of course, COVID happened. But what was fun was they took a conference experience of about 2,500 people, leveraged Zoom in some really innovative, creative ways, where it was actually, I think, a better conference than if we had been in the room, because you got to interface with like 100 people over the course of a 3-day meeting. And you had minutes, like blocks of time to workshop, to actually be in dialogue, to share your ideas back to social learning. So really be thinking about how it can be and needs to be multisensory. It shouldn't be a talk at unless there are short windows, like 10 minutes or less. And that will help us also think about application, right? All of this, if I'm not seeing the with them, if I'm not seeing the what's in it for me, if I can't see how this applies to my life, I'm out. I'm out in the first 5 minutes, not just the first, 30 minutes. I'm done. And that can also be contingent on trust and connection. So a leader of learning, a leader of a team, any leader, and we're all leaders in the remote space, we all need to make sure that we're feeling connected. If we're not, that's also the other disconnection point we need to look at. So any thoughts on here? Any little things that you could incorporate more in your programming next week?
Well, there are necessary reflection points already, but I could be I could be more creative in how I ask people to reflect on some things. In the past, it's been lots of paper, in fact, way too much paper, and a workbook. So I could be much more intentional about just telling them to come with something interesting. I did something called spiral journal the other day.
Okay,
where you
what's that?
sit and you fold a piece of paper in four, and then you take your pen and you just draw, and you just like, it's almost like mindfulness.
Ooh.
And then you get asked, it's from Liberating Structures, which I've been having so much fun with.
Yeah.
Lots of people from Canada, by the way, doing that. A lot of people I've connected with. And then you like ask people the question and they write something there, and then you tell them, okay, now go back to the next. So they've really like censored themselves. And I think something like that, when you're asking people to reflect on a couple of prompt questions, could just be really useful. You say them, you have a visual on the screen. Whether or not they're looking at you or not is fine. You're putting it in the chat. So I'm just thinking about that as something to reflect on after we're doing a career timeline. So that might be a really nice place to, before we get into what did you notice in the insights, just kind of really think about how did I feel, like the whole body experience. What am I thinking? What am I hearing? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's got to be multisensory. So
Yeah.
one final one that I want to really reinforce is like clarification, which is a flip side of a myth I did last week or 2 weeks ago, which was like, they'll understand, right? Like a lot of times we have these great ideas, but we're not building in the checkpoints. Also, not only for application, but for understanding check. Are people getting it? Are we giving them a chance to hear from others? This is where like the peer-to-peer interaction becomes so critical, to get people to really share what they're hearing, how they're thinking of application, and that's just yet another layer in here. So I don't know what's happened to my slide deck. What's going to help you? What are the things you want to either think more about, experiment with, practice on, or actually pass on to the teams that you're working with? And that's a slide I ended a couple of weeks ago of like, we don't want to just come to calls like this and say, oh, that's nice, but like, is there one thing you can think about further or research further? Is there something that you might experiment with, i.e. try it out this week? And is there a practice that can get further strengthened? You've talked about, the spiral journaling.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could really think more around those neuroscience points as you map out your program, like what principle, how do the principles overlay? I mean, they're not going to be neat, but really think that through a little bit more.
Yeah. And
in terms of a flow.
It's like that layer, right? It's yet another layer to mastery. And then it becomes just the way we do things. It really becomes part of the practice. Oh yeah, I need to be thinking about the start and end. Oh, I need to be thinking about those feedback rounds, etc.
And I think even those neuroscience ones can help you, like as you like your flow chart of what start, all the touch points before, during, and after. They have relevance the whole time, like the tone you take. Yeah, I can be more intentional about that, because we should be sending a reminder for next week. So I can be more intentional about that. Good.
There you go. You got your action step. So that's the now what. Whether you have a nice zigzaggy road like this, or you give some, get people to draw it out. Like really, we visualize everything and really be intentional on like, what are the structures that remain there post call? Because once Zoom is closed, it's closed. So what are people leaving the call with physically, tangibly, whether it is digital or analog? We really want to be intentional with that. So as always, lots on the go. I think what's coming up this month, actually, we'll be doing another PDT, another PlanDoTrack facilitator training. So for anyone who's interested, that 3-day training is going to run the 19th, 21st, 26th. And coaches, facilitators, trainers can actually take PlanDoTrack out into the world. So that is on the go. And a reminder that next week's call is going to be 10:30 Eastern, and it's going to be a design sprint. So literally bring a program you want to work on, and we'll work on it real time for half an hour. You'll leave with a skeleton, which is sort of fun.
Okay.
All
Sounds
right,
great.
Kathy, good to see you. What was your big takeaway from today beyond the neuroscience? Is there anything else that was useful out of this 30 minutes we got to spend together?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just reminded, one of the things I really appreciate is that it's simple but not simplistic, and clarity. You drop like Barbara Fredrickson. You mentioned theories that I can go and look up again, but you don't get into all the details. Like you don't explain what the theory just tells us, and I think that can be really useful at points in time. Sometimes you need to dig into it a bit, but it's really you're very clear, and I'm just reminding myself how necessary that is.
Yeah.
To be super clear.
So go back to that call we did on the remote enablers. I didn't bring them in today, but communication, clarity, culture, collaboration, I think I said community already, but consistency. So
yeah, I've been using the white paper a lot. I've really been going back to the white paper. It's been like anytime I have to talk about something, I go back to the white paper. It's been really useful. Really great.
I wouldn't have known how far it has gone, but I'm glad I invested the time because people are using it. So thank you for that story as well. All right, Kathy, have a great week.
Bye.
Good to see you.
Feel better.
Yeah, thanks. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.